Welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the 2025 AFRL Regional Network Midwest Annual Meeting. On behalf of AFRL and our regional leadership team, I want to thank each one of you for taking the time to join us this afternoon. Whether you're a seasoned network partner joining us for the first time, your presence and your engagement within this network community is what makes this so collaborative and impactful. The network thrives because of the strong partnerships between academia, industry, and our government partners across our region. We want to thank you for your dedication to the national defense ecosystem. It's what drives progress, not just for AFRL, but for the entire nation. So thank you for that. We're going to get started, and I'm going to introduce you to our first speaker, Dr. Karen Plout. Dr. Plout is the principal investigator for this initiative and the executive vice president for research at Purdue University. She oversees an expanding $600 million research enterprise. She's responsible for university-wide strategic initiatives and bringing together researchers and resources across traditional academic boundaries to drive interdisciplinary discoveries with societal impact. Driving excellence in research and among researchers features strongly in Dr. Plout's leadership to bring about breakthroughs that matter to society, and she's certainly helped our network in that capacity. We thank Dr. Plout for her continued support and guidance, and we'll open the floor to her to provide some welcome remarks. Dr. Plout?
Thank you so much, Stacy. And I want to welcome everyone to this virtual meeting, and I want to thank Stacy and her team because they really have adapted to a rapidly changing scenario in the status of the AFRL Regional Network in the Midwest. Stacy and her team, along with the AFRL team, Eric in particular, as well as some others, are managing this change in funding and uncertainty extremely well and really doing everything they can to ensure the essential work of projects that contribute to the AFRL mission. In some cases, there will be more limited funding as we move forward, but Stacy and her team continue to adapt to that uncertain financial future. And Purdue, as a national security university, we pride ourselves on national security. We continue to be a solid partner in helping to advance the great collaborations and work done with AFRL, the regional network, and all of the partners, many of who are on this Zoom call today. Nice to see so many of you joining us. It's really exciting. And that shows the growth of the AFRL partnership with this network. And it's really been amazing to see that the partnership has grown, the partners are growing, and the types of projects continue to grow and meet more and more of the AFRL mission. There's no doubts we're seeing positive results and the impact from these opportunities. I think if you've had a chance to read some of the great newsletters that come out or see some of the videos from the various projects, you can see this AFRL Regional Network in the Midwest is making progress. As we move forward, we have to double down on efforts and work together to keep moving forward to impact our national security and the mission of AFRL. It's a really, really important mission, and we're all behind it, regardless of some of the changes that may come in the near future. Going to a virtual format obviously provides significant cost savings for all and hopefully allows more to participate and connect without the travel part. And we're really excited that our keynote speaker, CEO Gerald Goodfellow of the Small Business Consulting Group, has joined us today. I'm going to go through a little bit of his background, but he's so accomplished, I can only cover a few things in the time we have here. Goodfellow retired as a Brigadier General after 30 years of service to the Air Force. He has an amazing record of accomplishments. As I mentioned, I'll provide just a few details. He received the Distinguished Flying Cross for heroism in combat. He holds the world's record for fastest nonstop flight around the world, which he did in a B-1 bomber, and was awarded a Mackay Trophy, which is on display at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. His last active duty assignment was as Director of Strategic Plans, Programs, and Requirements for the Air Force Global Strike Command. In this position, he was responsible for strategic planning and for resourcing the nation's Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile force, the B-1, B-2, and B-52 bombers, the UH-1, and helicopters, the E-48, E-4B National Airborne Operations Center aircraft, and nuclear command, control, and communication system with a budget exceeding $13.5 billion. He has 3 master's degrees related to aeronautics and military operations and has been involved with numerous executive education programs. He's the founder and CEO of Small Business Consulting Corporation, which has a strategic partnership with the Air Force. They focus on aligning partners to create a collaborative environment to help transition technologies to be used for critical defense missions. He believes in building partnerships and creating a collaborative environment to spark innovation to enable the U.S. military to better defend the nation. I want to thank retired Brigadier General Goodfellow for being willing to speak to us today. And I think you all can see how timely it is to have him here and how well what he's doing fits with many of our partners on today's Zoom call. So I want to thank very much. Thank you, Brigadier General Goodfellow, for being here today. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Karen. Thank you, Stacy and team, for asking me to join. Would have loved to have done it in person, but I agree with what Karen said. There needed to be we needed to change that, because of the current budget situation. I'm really glad they were able to do this. What I'd like to do is I'm going to tell you a little bit of my story up front, and then I'm going to get into what I've done, and what I need to do though before I tell you what I've done. What I want to do is tell you the why I've done it, and in a nutshell, I'll just give you a little taste of what we've done. But we brought like 127 companies in like the last 36 months onto like $338 million worth of government contracts. And we got about another 27 companies with about 90 million in the pipeline there. And but I want to tell you, and that's what my company does. We bring the best. Our goal is to bring the best technology to the military, largely the best commercial technology, I should say, to the military. We really focus on their commercial technology. But what I'd like to do is tell you, how I decided that I had to do that. So I'm going to share some slides with you here real quick. And I think I'm going to be able to tell you a story that will resonate with a lot of the people in the room. So in 2013, I was a young lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. I'd actually been in the Air Force at that point for about 13 years. And I get my first assignment to the Pentagon. And I show up, and the very first day I'm there about 6:30 in the morning. My boss walks in, my new boss walks in, and he says, "Oh, hey, you're Gerald." I say, "Yeah, I'm Gerald." And he says, "Okay, good to meet you. Go down and make an appointment to see the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, who is a guy by the name of General John Jumper, a 4-star, who was in charge of the whole Air Force." And I figured, oh, heck, the chief wants to say hi to one of his new guys, right? I was too naive, too dumb at the time to actually know that there's people who work in the Pentagon for like 4 years and they never see the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, But I didn't know that then. I just thought that he was wanting to say hi to one of his new guys. But I had entered this organization called the Skunks, and it was basically a think tank for the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. Only had about 13 people in it, but he was really happy with the kind of thinking that came out of the Skunks. And but what had happened is so anyway, I go down to make an appointment, and I actually did know the chief, from just some past, some past acquaintances that I had. We had a mutual friend, and but I didn't know him very well, so it was kind of it was weird, in hindsight that that anybody would have thought that was weird. But anyway, I go down to see the secretary, and And I say, hey, my boss told me to come down and make an appointment to see the chief. And she says, hey, are you Gerald? I said, yeah, Gerald, and she said, well, hold on just a second. He's going to want to see you. So she walks in his office. This is about 6:40, maybe in the morning now. And she walks in and he comes walking out, just kind of right in front of her now. And he says, hey, Gerald, come on in. I've been waiting to see you. And he says, and so we exchange pleasantries. And he says, hey, I've got something I want you to do. And he says, everybody's kind of busy down in the skunks, but I love what the skunks does. He says they're good thinkers. And he says, last year in last year's NDAA, Congress mandated that each of the services do an annual war game. I actually got to name what we started calling, they still call them Title 10 war games, right? But anyway, he says, but I volunteered to be the first one out of the chute to do this war game. And he says, I want you to run it for me. And I said, okay, heck, I'll run it. And I'll tell you what, it ended up being the hardest time I've ever had in my life. It was really a hard thing to do. And I was kind of ill prepared to do it. There were just so many moving parts, but I didn't know that at the time. But, so I started preparing for this war game. Again, 2003, this scenario is a Chinese scenario, and we're going to protect freedom of navigation on the South China Sea kind of thing. And at the time, it's top secret, but it's kind of interesting that now I've war gamed a number of times against Chinese scenarios, and it's always one of two scenarios. It's South China Sea to protect freedom of navigation, which we've had basically since 1945. And America's provided it, or it's the East China Sea to protect Taiwan. And, pretty much every time I've war gamed against it, we've lost, and you could go to Google and look this up, and, you'll see that the U.S. military, seems to always lose those war games. But we always call China the near peer competitor in this, although we've been losing against them since like 2003, right? And we were playing as if it was like 2018, 15 years in the future, because we lay in all of our money for 30 years into the future. And we figure we have a pretty good idea of what we're going to buy, in the next 15 years. And so we figured we knew what the US was going to have by then in terms of capability. We figured we knew what China was going to have. But we war game against them, and I had this big surprise. There's about 600 people in that game, about 300 on the blue side, 300 playing China, the red side, and a lot of really smart people knowing what each service's capabilities are. But so it concerned me, I remember, because I never would have thought that before I executed the game. But once we did the game, I was pretty confident that that's how it would play out. And it seems like it plays out that way all the time when they war game against China. And it also seems like we do very little about it. When we lose, it doesn't seem to affect anything. We don't go buy a bunch of new stuff. We don't cancel programs and start new programs. Everything pretty much stays the same. And I'll give you an example. In that war game, if you look down here at the bottom of the slide, it's pretty representative of what of one of the capabilities that we played. And the capability was called the Joint Unmanned Combat Aerial System, JUCAS. Today, the Air Force would call that its loyal wingman concept. We're going to send in, these unmanned aircraft with maybe one manned aircraft, and they're going to be able to control everything, these aircraft are going to be stealthy. We can bring them in mass, all these kinds of things. And, and it was called the joint. That means there's more than one service doing it. So this was a Navy Air Force program that I think we ended up spending several $1 billion on. In fact, I saw like a prototype of one of these things, about 2/3 the size of an F-117, very stealthy, they get through all that kind of stuff. And, they could drop like 3 small diameter bombs. They could drop, or they could carry comms packages, so they could extend communication on the edge. Some, believe it or not, even today we have problems making sure we have assured communication, or they could take video, or they could take camera pictures. They could do whatever. But bottom line, when we were adjudicating the game, if there was a JUCAS on a mission, we give it credit for getting everything done. And we still lost, by the way. But anyway, so we have the same. So and so we had a report where it was about an 80-page report. About 20 of those pages were dedicated to this capability that we thought was so key for us to have in the future. I'll show you a bigger picture of it all. But anyway, this is actually, hey, by the way, we were supposed to have by like 2018, we were supposed to have like 2,000 JUCASs, right? By this is 2003. This is a big program. We're supposed to have, like 2,000 of these. Interesting enough, this is one here that was actually flying within the last couple of years that is basically that same kind of airplane, the XQ-58 Alpha. We did build some of these. This is the US version of it. And I'll tell you, usually I ask the group, but I want to ask this group, how many do you think we actually built? We're supposed to have 2,000. Well, we built 3 of these, right? And in fact, one of them is already in the Air Force Museum. So there's still 2 of them that are out there flying and testing. We're always talking about other programs where we're going to build more of these kinds of things. I'm not sure where those are exactly. But here's the thing that scares me. Just 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, December of 2022, there was an air show in China called Air Show China 2022. There's a guy by the name of Chris Osborne who writes for a magazine called Warrior Maven. And he basically, says that basically this airplane here is largely just a copy of this airplane, like a 90% copy of this airplane, right? And so we had been before we war game that thing in like 2003, we'd been talking about this since 96 and thinking about it, coming up with concepts of operation, doing all that kind of stuff. But when it came down, so we'd done 7 years of thinking. We played it out in a war game and we said, yep, we absolutely need this capability. And then nothing ever materializes. I remember in 2010 when they canceled the JUCAS contract, which is really hard to do, by the way, cancel a contract. So it must have really been over budget, behind schedule, all those kinds of things, because it's really hard to cancel a program. But anyway, I remember in 2010, and I'm actually at that point, I'm an Air Force guy, but I'm a professor at the Army War College at the time, a colonel. And I remember thinking, man, I hope they have something better. I hope there's something else out there, And largely, I think the answer to that is we didn't, and we're still going down this path. My problem is that, this came out in 2022, and I remember when I saw this thinking, well, the problem is that the Chinese will probably have like 5,000 of these in the next 5 or 6 years, right? If it proves to be the capability we want, we'll still be messing around in the US with 2 or 3 of these things, right? So same solution, different decade, and we don't build, we don't build anything, right? There's this whole of nation approach that the Chinese have too. This is the unrecognized crisis that caused these 4 bullets are the unrecognized crisis that made me decide I needed to leave the Air Force and I need to start a company, right? To get after this. I was the general officer. Some of you may have heard of AFWorks, but I was the champion that got AFWorks going, at the time. And so, I'd had some background and watched small companies, deliver on time, on budget, on capability. And I become the Air Force guy who was in charge of a bunch of big programs at Global Strike Command. And, I watched countless prime contractors that weren't delivering on time, on budget, on capability. And I decided, hey, I thought maybe I could have an impact on that. And I decided to go give it a shot. But there was, China has what I call, so I've been looking at China for a lot of years, 22 years. I've been, a student of what the Chinese military is doing. But anyway, back to the whole of nation approach. I lost my train of thought there for a second, but China has what I just consider a good strategy. So Stacy, if Stacy was the Chinese businesswoman and she owned a factory, and there was something that she was building in that factory that were going to help the Chinese military, it'd be the first thought in her mind, right? Because it's the first thought in probably almost any Chinese person's mind. How am what I'm doing, how will that help the Chinese military? They would have people in her factory, on her floors, trying to figure out how to make this thing better, how to figure out a concept of operation, how we'll use it. And so that's what, and they would figure out how to integrate it into their military in short order. So I always call that, if they can build it, they will. If they can build a better capability, they will. So that's the first part of their strategy. If they can, they'll build it. If they can't, if they need to go buy it, they'll spend big dollars to go buy technology, and then they'll copy it, right? Or they'll even steal it before they buy it, right? But I say it's a fantastic strategy. It's a build, buy, steal strategy, and they're really, really good at it. It's a fantastic strategy, and it's hard to defend against, I think, in our society. But I ask people all the time, and I've been a guy who's been wargaming. I've really been at the strategic level. You guys should try it. Ask people in the military, high-ranking officers, what the U.S. strategy is to defeat, say, China. And I don't think they'll be able to answer your question. I don't think we have one, but I think they have a really good strategy, the build, buy, steal strategy. And the build piece of this is kind of the whole nation approach. They have something they call the civil military fusion strategy, which is all about doing what I just talked about with Stacy. How do we take the best commercial stuff, get it, or what's going on in history, bring it out? What do we do in the U.S. military? We tell young officers and who should be out there talking to history, talking to people outside the military. We tell those young officers, we tell old officers, don't talk to industry. You may inadvertently obligate the government, which, by the way, is a lie. You can never inadvertently obligate the government. If you ever find anybody who's done it, please give them my phone number. Tell them to call me because I want to meet them. The first person I know that's done it. What I really want to do is offer them a job, because if they're able to do inadvertently what I try to do advertently every day, I want them on my team, right? I mean, it's just what it is. And then you have what's gone on in the commercial sector, research and development. So in the 1960s, literally 90% of all research and development that went on in this country was paid for by the U.S. government. It was in government labs, or it was grants that we gave to people. But 90% of all R&D was paid for by the government in the U.S., only 10% by business. And when that was going on back then, and we had things come out of government R&D that was like, the home computer, it led to the home computer, all kinds of different microchip technology, GPS, all the things that came out of space age should include, things that we, Tang, that we know, most of us knew of as kids, or Velcro, all these kinds of things. And business was able to take that and, adapt it and turn it into big business, right? Now we're in a case where less than 20%, it's almost completely reversed, is of all R&D is spent by government, and over 80% by business. And what do we tell our young officers in the military, our enlisted people as well? We tell them, don't talk to industry. It's a crazy thing. Let me try to go a little bit further here in the problem. I've showed you that. So we're actually, let me tell you what I've done first as a company. So we have, I started a company about 4 years ago, but we've started helping companies get government contracts, largely in Air Force Global Strike Command, although we've gone out into both Air Mobility Command now and Air Education Training Command, and several other more minor commands where we're helping bring the best commercial technology. But we've got 127 companies on 338 million in contracts. We've got another 27 companies that we're working through contracts with. This should total about 90 million. I won't be surprised by the time we've been doing this for 4 years if we have $500 million on contract. We've got people working in all kinds of 29 states. We have people working and searching out the best technologies. I know this because I pay payroll taxes in 29 states in the District of Columbia. Here at Global Strike Command, we have about 62 employees, both full and part-time. We actually have partnered with AFWorks. Global Strike Command is the only command that's been able to give AFWorks has given us SBCC money to actually put on contract like 5 companies at a time to build, to change their technology. So it'll help the military. We usually down select. They get like $180,000, and we'll down select to like 2 companies and give them an initial phase 2 of like $1.8 million. We've done that 6 times. We also we actually started something called the Data Analytics Collaboration Cell, where we actually are building tools on Air Force systems that the Air Force owns. So, they don't have perpetual licensing fees and these kinds of things. They own the IP, and we're fine with that. We initially hired some really good, like graduates out of Louisiana Tech, of all places. They're just an hour down the road, so it made sense. And they started solving problems. They've deployed 21, tools, that actually, are tools that are doing things that Air Force Global Strike Command otherwise would have been doing manually, is what it amounts to. Some really impressive stuff. And, we've got about 51 problems being solved in addition to the 21 that we already got. We did a university partnership. At some point, we realized there's a lot of smart people coming out of Louisiana Tech, but just around us, within an hour of us, we got like 4 universities. Let's reach out to them. So we started a university partnership program. We're actually looking to do one with Stacy at Purdue. She's trying to, you know, just get through her money crunch right now, but it's really cheap anyway. We'll help her with that. You know, these kinds of things I'll do for free, darn near, just because I care about bringing technology to the military. It's a passion, right? But you know, we ended up hiring. At some point we realized, look, students can do this. So we typically hire juniors, not a lot of juniors, but a lot of seniors and a lot of masters and PhD students. We started a second program to help Air Mobility Command, and that we only have one university, but Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville. Like I said, I'm hoping we start one at Purdue soon. So it's kind of good stuff. That's kind of what we've done. But let me get back to the problem here. So I started my business in April 1st of 2021. You know, this came out on April 9th of 2021 from the Director of National Intelligence. And I remember reading this part. This is what they wrote. I remember reading that. I said, finally, somebody gets it. You know, maybe this isn't unrecognized anymore. And I read it, and I'll let you guys read it here. But I remember when I was done reading it, I thought to myself, you know, a few minutes passed, and I realized, oh, they only got 1/3 of the problem. They got the build part of this, the thing that I talked about was, you know, Stacy owning a company in China or whatever. They got the build part, but you know, they got the military civil fusion part right, but they didn't get the buy or the steal part of this. And you know, and so I wasn't as happy as I'd been when I originally read it. And I just come down to this. I said, look, it's recognized at least in this way we're being challenged, but they have a build, buy, or steal strategy. I don't know what ours is. And I'm going to tell you, I believe we're being challenged and we're losing. If we ever end up in a state where China's a superpower and we are not, this whole world changes. In fact, it will really change. Let me show you how bad I think it is. In 2003, this is the first time I ever saw this, but I took this out of the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, their ASPE report. And at least since 2003, because it's the first time I saw it when I was doing that war game, they've been tracking like the world's top kind of leading technologies for defense, and about 40 of them. And I remember in 2003, when you looked at the lead country here, it all had USA next to them. There's only 2 that didn't have USA, but there was none of them that said China, right? 2 said other countries other than the USA, 38 were USA. Now you look at it, 37 out of the 44 say China next to them of these critical technologies, right? And again, I don't know, you know, I don't think we're doing a lot about it, right? So here, I know I'm describing a problem, right? But I'm going to tell you, I'm going to keep describing that problem. Then I'm going to tell you one of the things that or a number of things that we've done to try to solve this problem. So in 2019, this was a year that AFWorks, I was still, you know, very tied to AFWorks, although I was at Global Strike Command by that point on active duty, still doing a lot of, you know, still, you know, helping AFWorks and those kinds of things. But the U.S. DoD awarded $382.6 billion in new contracts. Of those, 34.3% of that went to the top 5 prime contractors. If you went to like the top 20 contractors, you're probably looking at 99% of all the awards that were made that year, right? So I had worked with a whole bunch of these companies when I was working with AFWorks, you know, smaller companies that you put them on a contract to do something and they would deliver on time, on budget, on capability. And then I become Global Strike Command guy, and there's like 204 programs, and almost none of them are on time, on budget, on capability. So what do? You know, and what's interesting is this is where innovation comes in America, to be quite honest with you. You know, the bigs, and I think there is a need for the bigs. I just don't know how much need there is for it at those prices, right? But they even tend to hire different types of engineers. You know, these tend to be very innovative people. These tend to be people that keep stuff going, at least in today's military, right? Different, but you know, there's 500 times more money going to just the top 5 primes than to like more than 1,500 companies out there. And I'm telling you, I believe our biggest advantage is innovation. And if we don't do something about it, you know, and we've been playing a lot of innovation theater in our country. And what I'm going to do here, I know I only got 5 minutes left. Maybe Stacy will let a few questions be asked. I don't know. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to describe what the problem is. And I suspect there's some people here who have had like SBIR contracts, or I'm sure we have entrepreneurs in the audience. And I'm going to tell you what you're going to experience if you work with the government and you're not watching yourself really closely. And I hope all of you, for the people who are who have business or entrepreneurial building things that they think would help defense, man, I hope you keep trying, right? And some do have success. But I actually came in 2019. I presented this to a guy. Excuse me. In 2021, I presented my idea to a guy, a general officer at Global Strike Command, and he liked it. He says, "Hey, go do this." He says, and by the way, my idea was that we would help companies work with the government. I knew what needed to be done to get there, how to get them to long-term money. The second hardest thing you will ever do in the military is transition a new technology to long-term money. We program for 30 years. We program money for 30 years in the military. The hardest thing you'll ever do is get that money for the thing you're building, right? But it can be done. It's not impossible. It's just really, really hard. Second hardest thing, by the way, if you get it, the first hardest thing is actually canceling your program. It almost never happens. Very seldom does it happen. And it's interesting because I actually come to the belief that the two hardest things I just described to you, number two, getting the best technology in the military, and actually canceling technology that isn't proving out or has become obsolete. Those are the two hardest things. In my mind, those should be about the two easiest things we do, but it isn't. It's just, I'm just telling you the facts. So, I've got a degree in economics with a concentration in finance. My dad was a professional economist. I like business. I like economics. And what I've done here is I've got out of an old econ book. Actually, I took the life cycles of a company. I mean, I'm actually into some private equity and some venture capital as well. So I really kind of understand money in a big way. But basically, in blue, we have early stage companies. Here in orange, we have mid-stage companies, and here in green, we have later stage companies. And then, broken apart, there's kind of the funding stages. Where do companies go get money? We hear a lot in the military. I've heard very senior officers say, we've got to figure out how to keep companies out of the valley of death so they can keep bringing this innovation to us. It's kind of funny because they'll use the term valley of death. I'll say, well, what causes a company to go into the valley of death? And they don't know, right? A lot of times, not all the time. Sometimes they know. But it's a pretty simple answer. And any of you guys who are in business who happen to be in the valley of death, which I'm sure there's some in the audience, it's what happens is you start out with a great idea. Maybe you're going to design, in this case, an electric jet engine. You've got best scientists, you got minds. Maybe even you've been working somewhere else and you save some money and you have partners that have saved a little bit of money. But you start working on that new technology. You start bending metal. You start coding. You start paying employees, and you start running out of money. So what do? You do what all entrepreneurs do. Usually, they go get the easy money. And by the way, it never seems easy when you're trying to get any money, but you go to mom and dad, you go to brothers and sisters, you go to people who knew you and loved you when you were a kid, people who believe in you, right? You get money from them. And then it becomes really hard because, you're still in the valley of death. You still need more money. And so, as you kind of get into where the orange area, I always tell people one of two things has to happen when you drive into the orange area. You either better have a really rich founder who's going to back you, or a really rich sponsor who's going to back your technology, or you better be selling stuff already in the marketplace. You better be selling your first prototype or your second prototype in the marketplace, and like kind of what Apple did, and continue to build better and better stuff, right? That's how you survive in the orange with, but 90% of all technology companies will actually go into the valley of death, right? And only about 90% go in and only about 10% emerge. So most of them die right here. So one of the cool things that AFWorks did is they got a hold of the SBCC program, right? I wrestled away from AFRL and, started giving these SBCC contracts across the nation. They really opened up, I think, really the SBCC program, gave it really great publicity. And they got, like, the second time they applied, somebody told me, they got, I forget how many X over that they'd ever had applied to one application process, the SBCC process. By the way, SBCC is back in AFRL now, and they're still, and still it's pretty darn good, I think. AFWorks is now in AFRL, and I think they do a pretty darn good job, So no shot at AFWorks there. I've always AFWorks or excuse me, no shot at AFRL there. I think they're one of the most remarkable organizations we have in the military, actually. But it just so happened that there was a period when AFWorks wasn't an AFRL and they were running the SBCC program, and that's when I was really heavily involved in them. But they were given thousands of companies SBCC phase 1 and phase 2s. By the way, later on you'll go to you'll do your Shark Tank thing. You'll go to an angel investor and maybe they give you $1 million or something if you're really lucky, and for some big portion of your company, and you take it even though you don't want to give up equity, all that kind of stuff. But if you get a SBCC, it's kind of interesting because you get non-dilutive capital into your company. So the people who gave you early money, mom and dad, brothers and sisters, friends, the angel investors, the Shark Tank people, they all love it because their equity is not getting diluted either, right? And people are able to continue to work on their technology, change it a little bit so maybe it works well in the military, and then maybe you can get a follow-on phase 2 as well. I think that's what they used to call them as follow-ons in the Air Force. We now call those TAC-5s, which gets you 2 more years worth of SBCC money, or strat-5s, which gets you 4 more years of SBCC money. And so what happens is companies often feel like, man, I've come out of the valley of death. Look, I get a strat, I got 4 more years worth of money, and the Air Force is telling me every time I turn around, this is better than sliced bread, best thing we've seen. It's going to revolutionize warfare. And you're just thinking this is the greatest thing. But then what happens? You run out of the easy. By the way, all money getting in the military is hard, but you run out of the easiest of that money, and that's research and development money. And whoever's sponsoring that thing, who's ever been helping you get money, they say, hey, no more. We don't have any more R&D to throw at this. And companies, maybe have 40 people now. Those are some bad. I've seen a lot of examples where people have had to lay off like 40 or 50 people because the government says, hey, because you don't have long-term money yet, you fall off the DoD cliff of death. So what we do, there's 127 companies out there right now that Global Strike Command, Air Mobility Command, and Air Education and Training Command have said, we're really interested in their technology, keep working with them, and they pay us to do that. And so what we do, we actually, from the very beginning, we understand the problems. We tech scout, we find the right companies. The government decides if they want to put them on a contract or not. And then we start working transition. When I say transition, it's just not to like a phase 3 contract, which technically isn't a SBCC, but you can use SBCC authorities to do it. When they start executing those contracts, we start working a transition plan, something that really doesn't happen usually in any kind of SBCC process. And we start working with the program offices. We start figuring out where and when we're going to transition this thing, what program office we're going to try to transition it to, and when we're going to try to get it into the long-term money, which we call the program objective memorandum in the Air Force. And then at some point, I've developed this company doing the second hardest thing I know how to do in the Air Force. When that finally gets done, we throw them over the fence to the program offices and say, okay, you got them for the next 30 years, right? So it's a kind of a crazy model, right? All these companies that we're getting paid to work with will gladly give them to a program office to manage. But what we do, that transitioning part, this part, by the way, if you're on a SBCC right now, if you're on an early R&D contract with the military and they're telling you how much they love you, how it's going to be good, but nobody's talking to you about transition, I got news for you. You're playing a really ugly game of innovation theater, and you're going to die. And you better start talking to somebody about how you're going to get long-term money, and there better be a plan for it, or you're going to die. And I'm going to tell you, most of the time, there isn't a long-term plan for it. It's nobody's working you into the palm is what it amounts to. So we just decided we don't work with any company that the military is not working towards getting them long-term money. And if they don't get it, we work really hard to identify other kinds of money that you can pay for that stuff with. Work really hard with the government to do that. Even and we do keep companies going that we already think should be in the palm and they're not. And we find ways to keep their technology going and making it relevant. But eventually, those companies will throw them over the fence. So anyway, I know that I'm 3 minutes over, but that's what actually Stacy had a preview of this, and she thought that this would be perfect to talk about with this group. I'm open to any question. Well, Stacy, do I have time for questions, or is my keynote, is it all just over now?
Well, we started late, and this is
Okay.
very flexible. Part of being agile is allowing you to, we have some engaged people in the chat that I think might have some questions for you. And
Okay, great.
so just unmute yourself, please, and feel free to ask your questions.
So this is Frank from AFRL RV. I've got a quick question.
Hey, Frank, nice to meet you. Thanks for what you do at
Um,
AFRL. I much
yes,
appreciate it.
thanks. So recently, last several years, the Space Force has stood up. What are your goals and objectives for supporting Space Force? I know within AFWorks they've got SpaceWorks, and there's a lot of SIBRs that come out of there. But it seems like your company, your organization is aimed at focusing industry to connect with DoD organizations. Do you have plans to reach out to Space Force organizations?
Okay, so Frank, we have not reached into the Space Force yet. It's taken it's taken all of our time and energy, I guess, and funding and everything else just to get what we got going now. I would love to be in the Space Force. I would love to be in the Army. I would love to be in AFRL, helping them. And in fact, we're going to through AFWorks. I think they're looking at putting us on a contract right now. We're in talks with them to actually help help them with transitioning. Because when I was lucky enough to have a hand in starting AFWorks, we all used to say, all the early people that started AFWorks used to say, hey, this is great getting phase ones, phase twos, this early money, but it means nothing. We all knew it would be innovation theater if you couldn't transition. And here's the deal, almost nothing is transitioning. We're giving thousands of contracts in the Air Force, and nothing transitions. And AFWorks, has had a tough time with that. So they've come to us and said, hey, can you help us with the transition problem? And it's an exciting time for us because I think it'll even bring our company more, more notoriety. More people will know about us. But so that's fun from a business perspective. But we're gonna. I think we'll be on a contract, within this fiscal. Well, I think before the end of the calendar year, where we'll be working with AFRL to help transition. And I hope it's not just commercial technologies. I think the labs, also have a hard time transitioning technology. As you know, Frank. So, bottom line, I would like this going on all over the Air Force. One of the guys who works for us is a guy named Carl Schaefer. I'm sure you know him, Frank. He was the AFMC vice commander or deputy
Right.
commander, I guess they call it now, for like 5 years. Retired 3-star.
Yeah.
And he, when he came for us, he was one of our advisors. I was paying him a small stipend every month. And at some point, he joined us full time. Says, "Look, I just want to devote my life to this. Right? This is support stuff." But when he's still an advisor, he'd been with us for about a month, and he says he and his wife are talking, and he says, this organization that I'm advising now, he says this is something we should have been doing in the Air Force forever. He says, but we don't. It's at the MAGCOM level. It certainly does. In my view, this does not belong, at least the way that the program officers are organized right now. This pre-transition is not a program offices. Go ask them to even handle a Stratfire TAC-5 for you. They don't want to do it because they're not resourced to do it, right? And so it's interesting. If I were to go to a MAGCOM and say, hey, who should program manage this and who should do the contracting? They go to a program office, right? If I go to the program office and say, who should be doing this? They'd say, well, it's not us. I don't know. It's not us, and it isn't. I thought long and hard about it. Where does it belong? I actually believe it belongs where requirements happen. It's early still, right? And so now again, you're going to start way down the track in the JSIDS process because there's like 5 years of work that doesn't have to happen if the technology already exists, right? But Frank, I really do hope that we get into bed with not just the Space Force, but also a lot closer with AFRL and really are able to work, this kind of model throughout the Air Force. And I know of no other, I'm pretty connected, and I know of no other place in the military where this kind of thing is going on. There's a lot of innovation theater going on, very little how do we take that great technology and transition it. Frank, sorry, I'm not in the Space Force, but did I kind of answer your question a little? I'd like to be, if you can help me, I will.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I got it. Let me ask a follow-up if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
In the past, many years ago, when I did SIBRs, they were basically a crapshoot, right? You looked for some good technology and you thought this was kind of cool, and you went out and got a SIBR phase 2 or whatever. AFWorks and SpaceWorks now, it appears that they are focused, or at least there's more interest in focusing technology on government defense needs rather than just, a bunch of good ideas.
Yep.
So I take it you support industry in order to secure or engage with the government, DoD for SBCs. Do you work the other way? In other words, your connections to the various military government organizations, do you provide input to AFWorks on topics they should be doing that are actually relevant to, especially now? Like we're talking about like a 5-year epoch here to get prepared for certain things, right? Do
Right.
you provide advice and guidance like this is the technology that needs to get done? Center your activities and your cyber topics on these things.
Yeah, we absolutely do. And in fact, AFWorks actually came up with what they call directed topics. And so you can, and there's only one command who's done it so far, who's been selected for directed topics. And I think we've been selected for like 6 of them in 3 different cycles, right? And we're the only MAGCOM though that has. So you actually have to write up and say, hey, we want to get after whatever the technology is, laser communication or something, right? And you'll describe it out and say these are the kinds of things we want to get after, and they determine if they're going to select you or not. But by the way, AFRL does it too. I think the first time it was almost all AFRL or AFRL affiliated organizations and Global Strike Command. I don't know if it's got any better yet, but I'm told that we're still the only Global Strike Command is the only MAGCOM that has got those selected topics, but we really do write it up and say, hey, we need you to focus on this area. And then they're really good. They give you $180,000 per company to put them on a phase 1. Then they give you $1.8 million per company to put them on a phase 2. So that's been really, really good for us.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome, Frank.
Thank you for asking a question, Frank. And I just really wanted to thank you, General Goodfellow. It has been a pleasure getting to know you. A pleasure seeing you today. I'm glad that we were able to share this message with our network. We appreciate you, and I really am looking forward to driving innovation with you in the future. I'm excited about the things that are coming out of this.
So I'll tell you, it looks like you have a number of AFRL people in here. And I will tell you that when I first talked to Stacy, when she asked me about this, I said, Stacy, you're at Purdue. We should do something at Purdue. I think they're about 3 hours away from AFRL. And I said, which is fine, right? We can, and there's probably a whole bunch of universities between, that are nearby as well. We should do a DAC. And she loved the idea. So we're going to try to do that. I think we were really going down that road hard. And then, we all got hit with the CR, so we stopped. So I really hope we're going to be able to do that as well. It's going to be fun. I will tell you, Stacy, I offered Tom or Joe McKenna a job yesterday. I said, hey, if we get this, either way, he'll be in my company, right, when he retires. But I told him, hey, either way, even if I said, what I'd really like you to do is, run this thing for us, AFRL. He's this brilliant, test pilot engineer guy, wonderful guy. So I'll tell you, we've already hired him, and I hope he's going to be the guy if we do something with Purdue. If he isn't, if we don't get it going, he'll still be in our company doing good stuff. But anyway, so there's no pressure on you.
Well, we love Colonel McKenna, so that is even more wonderful.
Yeah, I've known him for like 6 years. He's a wonderful guy. Ian, I'm so sorry I didn't get a chance to answer your question. I'll go back to my slide real quick so everybody gets to see my email. If anybody wants to send me an email or call me or whatever, that's fine too. Let me just share it real quick.
We're going to be providing opportunities for anyone to ask to be connected with anyone else, and we'll make a list of everyone who wants to talk to you, and we'll do good follow-up here.
Okay, good. Thank you.